Hi everyone, it's Kathy. We're here live on Franklin Street and Emily Joyce is going to give us a tour. It's Back to the Future Franklin Street. You're going to really enjoy it. Thanks for joining us. Hi everyone, we're here with Emily Joyce. And Emily, if you would, just give me a little bit about your background and tell us where you'll be taking us today on Franklin.
Okay, once again, my name is Emily Joyce, and I have lived in Tampa for 15 years now, which is the longest I've lived anywhere. I was concerned when we first moved here that downtown was dying, and I looked with joy and watched downtown become a vibrant heart of the city. That's just been terrific. I've been a former tour guide before we moved here. I've been a teacher, and currently I'm a downtowner driver. That's the free ride share service if you're not familiar with it. And I've also been a downtown guide. So I have literally walked every street in downtown. Literally, I don't use that loosely.
That's awesome.
And so what I want to do today is make you believe, like I believe, that Franklin Street is the most walkable street in downtown. So what we're going to do is we're going to start here at Franklin and Whiting and look south, and then we're going to due to other circumstances, we're going to talk a little bit more here rather than by a noisy fountain. Then I'm going to take you by City Hall and talk about the improvements in the city. After that, we're going to take a look at the businesses and what a thriving district it was back in the day. It's coming back, but it had its heyday. And then we're going to walk 2 or 3 blocks a little bit farther to what was a popular gathering place. But if you aren't really looking, you wouldn't know what was there or what had happened there. And on the way back, I'm going to show you what was there before it became Like's Gaslight Park. Because again, there were thriving businesses there. This was a very walkable, comfortable, safe, busy, interesting street, and I know we're going to get back there.
Sounds great. This is going to be wonderful. Thanks so much.
Okay, we're standing here. You're looking south towards what was Fort Brooke. This is Franklin and Whiting. Fort Brooke was south of us here all the way to what is called Garrison Channel, makes sense, towards the port. And in 1824, 21 years before this became a state, this was fought over with the Spanish, the British, the Seminoles. And what makes it interesting to me, because I'm not a historian and I'm not going to tell you everything about what happened in the Seminole Wars and all that, but what makes it interesting to me is that this area, Fort Brooke, included escaped slaves who found refuge with the Seminoles. So they were all different tribes. The fort was not walled in. There were 20 houses. There was a superb oak tree that was preserved by Colonel Brooke. And the fort itself was a real mix of white soldiers, Native Americans, black men and women. And not only was there this wonderful diversity, of course, it was a little seedy back here. We won't go into that until my next tour. But the fort brought a post office, it brought trading posts, it brought a bowling alley, oyster bar, billiard hall, because of the soldiers migrating north.
Interesting.
So at this stop, we're going to talk about the railroad, because the railroad was a huge impact, had a huge impact on Tampa. Okay, but as Kathy reminded me, we're on Franklin Street. We're going to stay on Franklin Street. This is an area called Poe Plaza, and she's going to show you some of the historical markers that are here. there are quite a few of them that you can read along the way. For instance, right here is the Great 1900 Race. There's one about Kennedy. There's one about Billy Graham. There's one about the old courthouse. So they're all along the way, and you can do your own little tour if you want to walk down here and learn. But that would be kind of a boring tour for me to read that to you. Anyway, we are very, very close. We're on Jackson, we're on Franklin, but we're very, very close to the street called Jackson. So as we walk, you might see some cars whizzing by. It's a very, very busy one-way street. And what happened in Tampa around 1883 was that Henry B. Plant purchased defunct rail lines after the wars ended, and he agreed to run his lines in the city. Money talks, right?
Right.
The New York Times said, Mr. Plant pointed to the isolated, sandy, hot little village of Tampa with about 700 souls. There, said he, that's how they talked back then. There, said he, we will have a city. So, railroad fever was a big thing in the South before the Civil War. This became a boom town after the railroad, and the population of 700 tripled.
Wow.
Boom. If you know a little bit about Tampa, the Tampa Bay Hotel was built in the 1890s to 1903, I think it opened. But that was huge. And why? Because the railroad would drop you off right at this fancy schmancy resort hotel, brought the rich down here. So they came in with what they wanted to see in Tampa. So there's a little bit of the rub. This became less of a sleepy town of soldiers and farmers. The railroad also allowed the U.S. Army to make camp here along Ybor, and then if you know the story, Teddy Roosevelt famously stayed at the Tampa Bay Hotel waiting for their orders to go to Cuba to fight the Spanish-American War. So the Rough Riders, there were some conflicts with the people in town, but it allowed them to use Tampa for that purpose. So that was huge for us.
Amazing. It's just so much history. It's so fun to hear and be retold, because many of us have heard it, but it's always good to rehear because you forget all those details. So thank you so much.
Trust me. Okay, next stop is Franklin and Kennedy.
And we'll head that way now. I'd like to give a shout out to the Visitor Center. They've been such a great partner with us, letting us meet here. And just want to say thank you again for your support.
Quick unplanned stop. We're right by the Tucson, what city am I in today? Tampa Police Department. And Kathy's going to show you what the building looks like. It was a hotel in the 60s. The original place was beautiful. It had the dome that's now housed 3 blocks away. There's a plaque in regards to that. But there were lawns, people used to have picnics, there were mules and chickens and kids running around here. It was beautiful, but that got demolished for this hotel, which then became the police department.
And how long has it been the police department? Do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
60s.
And this
All right, for our 4th stop, we're going to concentrate on what was definitely one of the most thriving group of streets, all the way from, say, Kennedy all the way down to Harrison, and maybe even on to the interstate. There were stores here. Remember back to Fort Brooke, in the beginning, all they wanted in Tampa was the staples. You know, you had your grocery stores, you had your produce. But by the late 1880s, again, you got people coming in. You got the Tampa Bay Hotel built in the 1890s. You've got people wanting quite a bit more. So the prominent citizens were asking for more than just bread and milk and veggies. So along this area was thriving with shopping and social establishments. Some of the first goods that were sold here, books were very popular. Sadly, we've lost our only bookstore that we had in downtown, but books were very popular. Wine, you had to have your cigars, your jewelry, and Karen's gonna love this one when she hears it. Kegs of spiced pig's feet.
Oh,
were,
fun!
Prominent, and your ready-made clothing. Imagine not having to sew your own clothing anymore and be able to go into a store and have ready-made clothing. And then we talked a little bit about the diversity of Tampa in the very beginning, even when it was a frontier town. Well, it gets even more interesting. Imported goods became very, very popular, especially with the railroad, with the Tampa Bay Hotel, and the leaders were over the moon because that gave them a real cosmopolitan image. So what different peoples did we have here? We had Cuban, we had Scottish, we had Chinese, Caribbean, Jewish, African Americans. We had shops that were Cuban cigar shops, always popular in Tampa. Ybor's not the only area where they have the Cuban cigars. They were sold here, made there. And African American restaurants and shoemaking. So the good news was that people worked in downtown, they shopped, and they lived in downtown. The bad news is the Tampa Tribune praised it was the Oriental restaurant for their food and how tasty it was, but called the Chinese treacherous and unfit to be U.S. citizens. Kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth, in my opinion. The African American businesses were successful, but most of them were in the scrub, which is over by Perry Harvey Park and highlighted by a lot of signage there, which was basically neglected by the city and plagued with unsanitary conditions and poverty. So one of the interesting bits of history here, we passed what's called the Vault. And the Vault is now a wedding venue, party venue. It has a basement where the actual vault is, and there's a plexiglass screen with bullet holes in it. Because rumor has it that Al Capone, even though he was from Chicago, had businesses and business dealings in the Tampa Bay area, probably more. Complex. From down at the end, you can see on the building it says Exchange National Bank. This whole complex, which is now a wedding venue and a wonderful restaurant called the Gin Joint, which was restored by Tampa's own Carolyn Wilson. Got to go there. And the offices in here. This is one complex called the Ford Exchange Bank. And what I learned that means is that you weren't just going in to write your checks and deposit your money. Money was brought here and distributed throughout Florida. So you can see why Al Capone, there's some truth to that he must have distributed his money through this bank. And it was held up a number of times, and there are still bullet holes down there. Watching us, behind us, renovation is beginning. slowly, but Carolyn Wilson, who developed the Gin Joint restaurant, which has been a huge success, is planning to renovate both of these buildings. Oddly enough, in the corner building where the Woolworths was, there's a spring that's been there. There's an ancient spring, so water bubbles up from underneath the floor. They capped it off, but there's a natural spring inside that building, which is really, really odd and must be kind of a nightmare if you're a developer and you're trying to keep mold and everything down. But the Crest building was obviously a very thriving department store, and on the side behind me where there's an apartment building, there would have been another store. On the corner is, can't remember the name of it, but it was also a thriving store. Oh, and there's a plaque that shows Maryland Shoes. She wants to preserve that because in the tile it says Maryland Shoes. So that's a little bit about what was going on here. As we go into the next block, some of the buildings on the west side look very historic, and then on the other side you have the new apartment buildings. So we got a crazy mix of architecture and plans and ideas for Franklin, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what makes it so nice and so interesting.
All right, thanks for hanging in there with me, guys. We are at Franklin and Harrison, and behind me, Kathy is showing you the Tampa Harness and Wagon Shop. Okay. It was, as you can imagine, almost demolished in 2006 to create condos. That fizzled. And they almost rehabbed it into a nightclub. But this was an extremely popular place for people to gather because not everybody lived downtown. They were in farms, outlying areas. But on Saturdays, kind of like our current flea markets, everybody came in to exchange news, to exchange produce. You could have 100 mules and horses, and they're humans all in this area to come to the Tampa Harness and Wagon Shop. So this right here is one of the oldest, still standing buildings from the 1800s. Still standing, unused, nothing going on, but it's still standing, waiting for somebody out there to do something with it. Here's the quirky thing is, I know you're picturing like an old-timey frontier general store, but this building had electricity, it had elevators, and it was considered elegant. Because not only did they sell carriages were super popular, easy to get around, and fun fact, if you were a courting couple, if you were in a carriage, you could be by yourself, get to know each other. So kind of like parking back in the day. Bicycles, they sold bicycles because everybody wanted to zip around. If you wanted to go over towards the Ybor area, down to the fort, you needed a bicycle. So that was all sold here as well. So you're picturing these people and their mules and their horses munching hay right here. By the 1900s, though, they were selling automobiles. They showcased them on the second floor. I don't know where that is, but on the second floor, they showcased them, and they had a display window for the bicycles and the autos, and they also had the automobiles on the low-lying areas, obviously. So that kind of blew my mind. In 1915, let's see, what building is 1915? City Hall was built. In 1915, the Tampa Harness and Wagon relocated. So then it was empty for a little while, but it became subsequently a drugstore, a bag store. Not sure exactly what that was. And finally a home furnishing company for 40 years. So here it stands. On this same property was the Allen, actually I'll rescind that, I think it was across the street, was the Allen grocery store, which was huge. Bad news, we had slavery in Tampa. That should not come as a shock to any of you. Good news, there weren't many plantations, big areas. So many of the slaves lived in town, and so there was this real mix of enslaved African Americans and free African Americans. And for a while, African Americans and whites went to the same stores, shopped in the same stores, and they went to the same churches, and there was this real interesting loosey-goosey mix, and nobody cared, right? Everybody got along. They went to the same theaters. That was the other one. This was all before the Civil War. So just put a little bit cap on it. And then the bad news, as Tampa grew, the leaders wanted to boost their image, and they did away with that looseness, and they started enforcing the racially segregated laws. Good news, we're back to good news. In the 1950s and 1960s, racial segregation was eliminated. So we had the site of a semi-famous Woolworth sit-in, and you can see where the old building is on the way back. But so, bad news, good news, bad news, good news, all around this particular area right here. Okay. Did I hold this up for you? No. That's what it looks like.
There we go. Great. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, next stop and last stop, Giddens Corner. Ever heard of Giddens Corner? Stop here by Tampa's famous dive bar, the Hub. The Hub wasn't always here. The Hub was around the corner. And if you join us in January, I'll tell you all about our famous underworld figure, Charlie Wall, and this was his favorite bar. He used to walk down Franklin Street past all the stores and the theaters to have a drink at the Hub. So behind me, where the Tico building is currently, was stores, shoes, departments, and a theater across from the Tampa Theater. We're going to pass by the parking lot where we were standing before, and that was the famous Moss Brothers department store that was finally demolished in 1973, I believe. There was Moss Brothers and another store, and then it was demolished to put in a parking lot. Okay, this is our last stop. We are actually in what's called today Likes Gaslight Park, right in the middle of town. At one time, though, there was no park here. This was called Giddens Corner, and it was called Giddens Corner because Giddens Grocery Store was right here. It was Giddens Clothing Company. So the year we're talking about is about 1884. There was, you can see in the picture, you can see what was here, and you can sort of see behind us all the way, if there weren't so many mature trees, you can see across the bridge and see the Tampa Bay Hotel. So you get the right angle as you're looking west. But at one time, there was an opera house here. It had 1,500 seats. They had dramas, comedies, concerts, electricity, 1884. But it wasn't pricey and it wasn't elite. Everybody came. Didn't cost that much money. Probably kind of a rowdy affair. The rich, in the 1890s, after the Tampa Bay Hotel came, they would be over watching their own entertainment at the Tampa Bay Hotel. How dare they come in with a hoi polloi, right? So Giddens Corner had 2 soda fountains. Fun fact, there were ice cream shops, and one of them was called the Gross Ice Cream Shop. Unfortunately. There was a tailor, there was jewelry and clothing, And right behind us, we talked a little bit about the Tampa Police Department, and that was the courthouse lawn. And on that lawn, that was the site of silent movies, live bands, organ grinder, and a monkey. And of course, in this area, there would have been houses and businesses that hosted literary societies. People were anxious to get out and do. This was a city, and it was vibrant, and it was busy. What I noticed in this photo, having read just enough to be dangerous about walkable cities, is the awnings. They're beautiful, they're nice. I believe they should come back, but that's my personal opinion. Okay, so we're going to stop here, and I hope that I've convinced you that Franklin is the most walkable street in downtown Tampa. And some of the reasons why: it's comfortable with all the trees, as we've all noted. It feels safe. I've worked down here at 8 o'clock at night and never felt threatened. Been walking all by my lonesome and never felt threatened. It's interesting with the shops and the restaurants and, you know, the new wedding venues and the Tampa Theater. It's an interesting walk, and all of that makes for a very, very walkable city.
Well, you convinced me, and I want to thank you so much, Emily. You did a fabulous job on behalf of the Downtown Partnership, the Do the Local Motion, and Where Love Grows. I want to thank you so much. You did an awesome job, and I love all the history. You made it so fun.
Thank you so much. Book a downtown ride, and I'll see you on the streets of Tampa.
We'll do it.